Beijing today, as the Chinese Vice Premier continued his tour of this country. His two-day schedule in Texas is certainly varied: a visit to the Space Center, a rodeo and barbecue tonight, an inspection of oil drilling equipment tomorrow. Despite some coolness and one hostile demonstration, he seems to be having a grand time. Here's a report from Jim Laurie.
In Houston, Mayor Jim McCon gave Dunn a box containing a set of Texas silver spurs. But Dunn was denied the traditional key to the city, for Dunn's visit here was controversial. About 400 noisy demonstrators were on hand at Dunn's hotel. Houston, once named the sister city of Taipei, Taiwan, was not quite prepared to give the Red Chinese leader a real red carpet treatment. But at NASA's Johnson Space Center, the Chinese vice premier was denied nothing. He climbed aboard the lunar rover, a model of the moon buggy the astronauts used to explore the lunar surface.
These are some lasting impressions the Chinese will take away. Deng Xiaoping's aides say his most moving experience was here, when the National Children's Choir went to the trouble of learning Chinese to sing that old favorite, "We Love Tiananmen Square." Others didn't do so well. Across the country, his name was pronounced Ding, Dong, Dung, or even Ping. And one man struggled to get his title right.
I welcome you, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Vice Premier, to the United States of America.
As for Deng, he said he enjoyed American food, but found it unique that Americans ate veal at every meal. At 4 banquets in a row, that's just what Deng was served. We learned some new things about Deng. He likes astronauts, cowboys, and basketball, and has 2 grandchildren who asked Grandpa to bring home gifts. He needn't have worried. Deng was given a pewter owl, a moon picture, some Texas spurs, and not one, but 2 $10,000 bulls. Indeed, at the rodeo, the Chinese came alive. All wore cowboy hats and drank beer, and Lee Sun of the Chinese news agency summed it up.
We have good relaxation, good barbecue, good country music, and good rodeo show.
So the Chinese leave today with their memories and perhaps a new image for Communist China's leading man. For Deng Xiaoping not only went west, but went western. Jim Laurie, ABC News.
On July 15, 1971, President Nixon requested time on national TV.
The announcement I shall now read is being issued simultaneously in Peking and in the United States. Knowing of President Nixon's expressed desire to visit the People's Republic of China, Premier Zhou Enlai, on behalf of the government of the People's Republic of China, has extended an invitation to President Nixon to visit China.
The effect was electric. The idea was almost unimaginable. The Washington Post said, if Mr. Nixon had revealed he was going to the moon, he could not have flabbergasted his world audience more. The Cold War was raging. In Southeast Asia, China was North Vietnam's ally, and Richard Nixon's credentials as an anti-communist were longstanding and impeccable. But in the fall of 1967, Nixon wrote a seminal article about Asia after Vietnam. Taking the long view, he wrote, we simply cannot afford to leave China forever outside the family of nations. There is no place on this small planet for 1 billion of its potentially most able people to live in angry isolation. In January 1969, in his first inaugural address, President Nixon confirmed his determination to change America's policy toward China.
We seek an open world. A world in which no people, great or small, will live in angry isolation.
On February 17, 1972, after 2 years of secret and delicate negotiations, the President and First Lady were on their way to China. Premier Zhou Enlai was waiting at Beijing. In 1954, the US Secretary of State had snubbed the then foreign minister. Nixon wrote in his memoirs, I knew that Joe had been deeply insulted by Foster Dulles' refusal to shake hands with him. When I reached the bottom of the steps, therefore, I made a point of extending my hand as I walked toward him. When our hands met, one era ended and another began. A few hours later, the president met with Chairman Mao Zedong. The 79-year-old leader was in frail health, but the lively hour-long meeting included philosophy, history, and banter. Mao said, "I voted for you during your last election." Nixon said, "I think the most important thing to note is that in America, at least at this time, those on the right can do what those on the left can only talk about." Throughout his career, Richard Nixon always reserved time for strategic thinking, making and refining extensive notes on yellow pads. In preparation for his China trip, he considered all the possible permutations of policy involved. What they want, what we want, what we both want. At the Great Hall of the People, the president and the premier exchanged toasts.
Setting your toast, the Chinese people are a great people. The American people are a great people. We have at times in the past been enemies. We have great differences today. What brings us together is that we have common interests which transcend those differences.
At the end of the trip, diplomatic ground was broken with the Shanghai Communique. After covering the points on which both sides had reached agreement, they proceeded to detail their different positions on all the other outstanding issues. Nixon referred to this in his final toast to Shanghai on the eve of his departure.
That communique will make headlines around the world tomorrow. But what we have said in that communique is not nearly as important as what we will do in the years ahead. We have been here a week. This was the week that changed the world.
So again, this is important because it shows how Richard Nixon was able to use his political authority to overcome the vested strong interests, anti-Chinese, anti-Beijing interests that were dominant in the United States, both inside the government of the United States, the foreign policy bureaucracy, and not to mention the military, and also throughout American society after, this is 1971, the Korean War is only 18 years ago, when thousands of American soldiers and many thousands of Chinese were killed, and not to mention hundreds of thousands of Koreans, where Americans and Chinese were killing each other. And so there was a tremendous buildup of anti-Beijing commitment in American policies and in the bureaucracy that was created to implement and orchestrate and oversee those policies. And there are lots and lots of people with lots and lots of resources, political resources, economic resources, were committed to that Cold War policy of isolating communist China, or as it was also called, Red China. I remember as a child, it was on the television, it was described as Red China, Red China. And so Nixon opened up relations with China after having established a long history himself as a fervent Cold Warrior anti-communist going back to the 1950s, when he was or earlier actually, but he was Dwight Eisenhower's vice president from 1952 until 1960. He was the vice president of the United States, and he was a very fervent, strong Cold Warrior containment advocate who viewed communists and communists around the world as part of an overall evil empire. The diabolical enemy image that we talked about earlier. And he won election in 1968, promising that he had a quote plan, a secret plan that he would implement to get America out of the Vietnam War, that Lyndon Johnson had committed America to fighting and was not able to win. And that focus of that plan was basically exploiting the conflicts that were emerging between Beijing and Moscow, between China and Russia, between China and the Soviet Union, that were evident to anybody who was willing to pay attention and take seriously the political differences between the Soviet Union and China, and didn't explain them away as some kind of propaganda mechanism by which to try to fool people that the communists were in conflict with each other. that was evident in the 1960s, that there was intense conflict between Mao Zedong and the Soviet leadership under Leonid Brezhnev. And Nixon's plan was to open up relations with China and use the relationship with China, America's new rebuilt relationship with China, to put pressure on Moscow, on Russia, to help America by pressuring North Vietnam. North Vietnam's main ally was the Soviet Union. Getting the Soviet Union and Moscow to pressure North Vietnam, Hanoi, North Vietnam, to compromise with the United States in ending the Vietnam War, at least in a way that the Americans could look like they were not driven out of the country or ran away the way they would in Kabul in August of this year, out of Afghanistan. And by using this leverage, because Beijing and Moscow were locked in a conflict with each other, and using the leverage of American influence with China to pressure the Russians, to pressure North Vietnam to cooperate with America in the negotiations to end the Vietnam War, at least America's involvement in the Vietnam War. And Nixon went on a secret trip to China, because if it had been known that he was planning to open up relations with communist China, with Red China, the vested interest, the foreign policy bureaucracy, and all of the lobby groups that were committed to opposing and isolating China would have been mobilized, would have been active, would have been aware of what was going on, would have stopped him, politically stopped him. And so that's an example of how a political figure like Nixon was able to use his political authority as president of the United States to try to overcome the tremendous opposition he would have faced from opening up relations with China, with Beijing, and then Nixon, of course, would then resign from office 3 years later, and Vietnam would collapse, South Vietnam would collapse, Vietnam would be reunited under North Vietnam's control. The Cambodian regime collapsed, and then Richard Nixon was replaced by Gerald Ford as president. Ford lost the election to Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter, as president, re-emphasized building up this relationship with China, but the focus was on building up the relationship with China, again, against the Soviet Union. That the Soviet Union was seen as a cause or source of America's troubles and humiliations and embarrassments in the world, because the Americans lost the war, obviously in Vietnam and Cambodia, and then there was tremendous business opportunities for China. But of course, the Americans could see that China had intense conflicts with Russia, with the Soviet Union, and what ended up happening by the late 1970s into the early 1980s, when Ronald Reagan becomes president, but even before Ronald Reagan becomes president in 1980, under Jimmy Carter, China becomes a de facto ally of the United States against the Soviet Union. And this would continue until the end of the Cold War, that China, communist China, was a de facto ally of the United States and also a source of economic opportunity, because Deng Xiaoping, as was covered in that video, previous video I showed, was committed to integrating China into the global capitalist economy and developing China through foreign investment and exporting Chinese goods. So China de facto allied with the United States after the humiliation of the defeats of the 1970s in Asia, and then also including in Iran with the overthrow of the Shah, and then the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan during the late 1979 and around Christmas time 1979, and this all infuriated Americans, as Americans were both humiliated and other people were still hostile to the Soviet Union and saw the Soviet Union as a continuing threat. And America, in effect, became a de facto ally with China. And China would use this de facto alliance with the United States to open up business investment from American companies into China, and the American government would applaud the investment by American companies, from Coca-Cola to General Motors to later the big tech companies in China. And this only became seriously challenged under Trump, Donald Trump, a few years ago. And but I mean, since you're reading this week about the foreign policy bureaucracy, the point that I'm trying to make is that these policy strategies like containment or appeasement, whatever the name of your foreign policy strategy is, it requires that you create a diplomatic, bureaucratic organizations to implement those policies. And those organizations, those bureaucracies can become very big and employ hundreds of thousands or millions of people if you include the military. And it's, again, human nature for people to see the world around them in a way that protects their interests, including their career and job interests. And so if I'm hired to carry out and implement containment, I'm going to believe that containment is really, really necessary. And therefore the Soviet Union is really, really evil and bad. And of course it's really evil and bad. Oh yeah, because my job depends upon containment. Do you understand? And so these people also tend to be more highly educated. They tend to have money and resources. And they have their friends in the media, in the newspapers, in television, on radio. And if you're going to try to change American policy, if you're a president of the United States, you have to overcome these vast vested interests. And it's really difficult to do. And even Donald Trump didn't want to do the work of attempting to overcome those vast vested interests. In fact, they helped defeat Donald Trump when he began to oppose America's isolation of Russia, right? So, for example, you did your paragraphs. You're doing your paragraphs for a debate on Friday as to whether or not the first. Well, let me go back and look at that here for a second. So, but before I go on, let me continue on with this discussion here. So, I wanted to show you, these latest news reports that Donald Trump. You wrote your paragraphs last week. I think it was right. That let me go back and open up that the Cyber Campus site so I remind myself what we're doing here. And so, so your Cyber Campus question is, to South Koreans, U.S. foreign policy bureaucracy collectively will push the U.S. to a new Cold War with China. But last week you did your paragraphs on whether or not the first impeachment of Donald Trump made U.S. Foreign policy more dangerous and volatile as a result of that first impeachment. And that first impeachment of Donald Trump, which began about 2 years ago, focused on Donald Trump's attempt to get Ukraine to declare an investigation of Hunter Biden, the son of Joe Biden, the current president of the United States, in order because Hunter Biden was doing business in Ukraine, and so this is a report from 2 years ago when the first impeachment was beginning, in which it highlights how Mike Pompeo, the last Secretary of State for Donald Trump, who had replaced Rex Tillerson, who had been the first Secretary of State for Donald Trump, were not defending the foreign policy bureaucracy. It was the foreign policy bureaucracy, the establishment that had been committed to opposing Putin and opposing Russia, that Donald Trump saw as a threat, because many observers were claiming that the Russians played a role through a disinformation campaign using Facebook and but primarily Facebook, to try to spread pro-Trump propaganda in the 2016 election to get Donald Trump elected. So Donald Trump was committed to trying to get evidence that somehow it wasn't the Russians, it was the Ukrainians that were involved in that. Ukraine is bad. Ukraine is corrupt. Ukraine was doing all these things, where Hunter Biden was working as a business people, where Joe Biden, when he was vice president under Barack Obama, had some responsibility for US foreign policy towards Ukraine. But Ukraine bad, Russia not bad, Russia not bad. But you had this vast vested interest that built up in the United States during the Cold War that viewed Russia as bad. Russia was the Soviet Union. Moscow was the evil empire. And the Soviet Union is gone, but there's always been these vested interests that continue to view Russia as a problem, as a threat, that Russia will try again to rebuild the old Soviet Union, that the Russians are not accepting the fact that they lost the territory of the old Soviet Union, that they want to be a superpower because they always wanted to expand, and they will try to expand again. And so America has to expand its influence into Eastern Europe and into the former Soviet Union before Russia again expand its authoritarian, corrupt domination over those peoples the way Stalin had dominated those peoples during and after the Second World War. That these vested interests continue to be around that had been built up over many, many years, viewing Russia as bad, Russia as imperialist, Russia as dangerous. And so Donald Trump, and therefore Ukraine, which is opposing Russia, Ukraine, which wants to be an independent country, Ukraine that is on the border with Russia, has to be supported, has to be helped. The Americans have to work with the Ukrainians, develop their military to oppose Russian influence. And European Union is supposed to be part of that effort to encourage Ukraine to be pro-American, away from Russia. And so Donald Trump ended up going into conflict with all of these establishment vested interests in the United States that were focused on Russia being bad. And so since they were opposing Donald Trump's effort to manipulate and exploit Ukraine for his own interests at the risk of threatening America's commitment to building up an independent Ukraine, Donald Trump ended up attacking, and his aides and allies, Donald Trump's allies and friends in America, ended up attacking this foreign policy bureaucracy that was committed to building up an independent, stable Ukraine that would be pro-American and pro-Western, that wouldn't be vulnerable to American subversion, that wouldn't be vulnerable to exploitation, that would undermine America's efforts to build up a strong, powerful Ukraine that could resist Russia. So, again, and that meant that trying to claim that somehow it was the Ukrainians that were involved in spreading lies about Hillary Clinton to support Trump, that it wasn't the Russians, because of course the CIA and others were arguing, no, it was the Russians. It was Vladimir Putin's Russian government that was spreading interference in the US presidential campaign through Facebook. You can see here. And so, and the establishment fought back, including the ambassadors, professional ambassadors of the United States to Ukraine. They pushed out the American ambassador to Ukraine, Marie L. Yovanovitch, in April. And of course, Mike Pompeo was Donald Trump's Secretary of State, but the Secretary of State is a political appointee. They're not a professional establishment bureaucrat. That person can be anybody. So Mike Pompeo had been a congressman from Kansas. He had been an American military officer before he became a politician. Donald Trump's first Secretary of State was Rex Tillerson, the former president of ExxonMobil Corporation. Again, a political appointment, not a professional bureaucrat. And both of these individuals, Tillerson and Pompeo, basically ended up attacking the bureaucracy or undermining the bureaucracy in the United States, the foreign policy bureaucracy, the foreign policy establishment in the United States. Because they were seen, the foreign policy bureaucracy was seen as an obstacle to Donald Trump's own ambitions and their own political dreams and hopes. Like this person, Mike Pompeo, he's probably going to run for president. if Donald Trump doesn't run for president, he'll run for president in 3 years' time. If Donald Trump does run for president, he'll probably wait. But he has presidential aspirations. Mike Pompeo does. And so much of the impeachment of Donald Trump in the first impeachment trial that began 2 years ago was focusing on his treatment of people in the professional bureaucracy of the foreign policy, national security establishment of the United States. His abuse of them, his attempts to fire them, push them out because they viewed doing their job, which is representing and implementing official American foreign policy, that Donald Trump was trying to circumvent and override, despite the laws and policies that were adopted by the U.S. Congress, like for example, providing aid and assistance to the Ukrainian army, the Ukrainian military. Donald Trump was threatening or implying that he was going to keep that money and that military aid from going to Ukraine, the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian army, unless the Ukrainian government announced a fake investigation of Hunter Biden's business activities in Ukraine to make the Biden family look corrupt. And so there you see, and Trump went to war basically with the foreign policy establishment over Russia and Ukraine. And there were professional bureaucrats that first filed the complaints against Donald Trump, that first indicated Donald Trump was doing something he's not supposed to do, according to them, according to US law, because the US laws had been and policies and programs had been established through aid programs passed by Congress and signed by the president. And so Trump got into this conflict with the foreign policy bureaucracy. He ended up losing, right? It says here in October of 2019, after the publication of news reports, Mr. Pompeo admitted he took part in the pivotal July telephone call between Mr. Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. That was the call where Trump asked Zelensky to start an investigation of Hunter Biden on the telephone call. And that was the call that prompted a CIA employee to file the whistleblower complaint that ignited the impeachment inquiry. Right? Because again, you see the bureaucracy, the CIA.
Professor, could you please share your screen?
Oh, okay. Oh, gosh.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah. So yeah, that highlights. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, I mean, this news report. Yovanovitch was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Mike Pompeo, Rex Tillerson was the ExxonMobil oil executive who was the first Secretary of State under Trump for the State Department. Mike Pompeo replaced him, and they both ended up basically undermining the bureaucracy of the foreign policy establishment in the United States because of, Tillerson quit or was fired because he was seen as not having really serving Donald Trump's interests. Mike Pompeo became a willing advocate for Donald Trump's worldview because of his own desires to be Donald Trump's ally. Tillerson was fired because he wasn't competent, but at the same time, he wasn't willing to do what Donald Trump wanted him to do. So, it says at the same time, Mr. Pompeo is facing a revolt in the State Department. Confidence in his leadership has plummeted among career officials who accuse him of abandoning veteran diplomats, criticized by Mr. Trump and letting the president's personal political agenda affect foreign policy. And so morale in the State Department crashed. Lots of people quit from the State Department. So, this is where I was mentioning about how it was a foreign policy bureaucrats that filed their complaints against Donald Trump when he, in a telephone call, asked Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine to start a fake investigation of Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, to try to make the Biden family look corrupt. And so it goes on, says, morale at the State Department is rock bottom, but spirits have been lifted by the courage of these patriots. Wendy Sherman, the department's third-ranking official under President Barack Obama, said of Mr. McKinley and others testifying. She is now back in the Biden administration. So she is now, I can't remember, I think she's a deputy national security advisor, maybe, or deputy secretary of state. she is back. So I guess the Biden administration is representing and expressing the interests of this foreign policy establishment that Donald Trump sought to fight and undermine. Biden is all about the foreign policy establishment. And maybe he will change the foreign policy establishment, but again, it's very difficult to do that. So, these vested interests are really important. And I think I wanted to highlight here, let me see if I can find my paper. I published a paper on this topic on the foreign policy establishment and Donald Trump's effort to challenge it. So this was the article that I wrote that got published a couple years ago. And I'm showing it to you because I just wanted to show you a couple of diagrams from it. So this was containment, right? The United States came to believe under Harry Truman by the late 1940s that the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany. And so you can see containment meant to contain the Soviet Union. How do you achieve that strategic objective? Again, the belief that the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany. Develop a military deterrence system that's going to cost a lot of money and develop and involve millions of people. Create economically and militarily strong allies in Japan and Western Europe. Encourage the non-common stability of other countries. That means investing lots of money and creating lots of bureaucracies to invest and oversee those programs to stabilize Greece and Turkey and other countries supposedly under threat from communist subversion and imperialism. To achieve containment, strengthen the economic, bureaucratic, and military foundations for a leadership role in the world affairs of the United States. So that means building a vast national security establishment. In the intelligence agencies, the military agencies, the foreign aid agencies, they're all part of the national security establishment that was built during the Cold War. And again, the prevailing view in America today, the politically predominant view is that the United States won the Cold War. The United States saved the world from the Russian version of Nazi Germany. So all of those vast organizations and interests and organizations created like NATO are good because they saved the world for freedom. They shouldn't be dismantled or thrown away. They should be expanded. NATO should expand. NATO should be involved in Asia and elsewhere, not just in Europe. Accept the necessity for providing leadership for the free world, right? And so you have to persuade your people, and you have to convince your people in that need, and you have to take the diplomatic lead in the world in containing the Russian version, supposed Russian version of Nazi Germany, and do other things. And so, and then there's the last category that fits in that, that's sort of residual, protect Israel and protect American investments abroad. This is relatively minor motivation, right? It's there, but it's minor. And then the next page, let me go back to the view here. 2 pages, what's on the next page? Oh, okay. Yeah, so, and the point I wanted to highlight here is that those vested interests believe that they saved the world. And so, and as I recall from when I was in school, the concern was that the US was going to basically go towards believing that it should set up a Pax Americana, a new world order through a war on terror to bring the benefits of America's hegemony to the whole world, the way that America brought peace to Europe between Belgians and French and Germans and it brought peace between South Koreans and Japanese, and that the America should do the same in the Middle East and everywhere else. Pax Americana, and indicating that you see some movement towards in grandeur. America won the Cold War. America is great. America is the great benign leader of the world that will now make sure that we never go back to the bloody history of the 20th century. And so America must fight Islamofascism. That's the term that Trumpists use and others use, the axis of evil, right? Iran and North Korea and Saddam Hussein's Iraq, they're like cancer cells that emerged during the Cold War that develop the international system. The way cancer, you might develop in one part of a body and then it metastasizes, right? It sends off cells that set up new tumors in other parts of the body. So America destroyed the big tumor of communism, the Soviet Union, right? But still there's these little metastasizing totalitarian dictatorships in Saddam Hussein's Iraq or Islamic Republic of Iran or Kim Jong-il, now Kim Jong-un's North Korea, that if the Americans don't deal with those small little criminal products of the Cold War, they could destabilize the region and create conditions that allow new evil threats on a global scale to emerge. And of course, those people that want to believe that America's destiny is to provide this global leadership, they would point to, for example, we still have the Communist Party in China, in power in China. And that regime is the next threat to the, what are they calling it? The international rules-based order led by the United States. That's what Joe Biden and Wendy Sherman and other people in the US administration are using to describe America's world order that America leads, the international rules-based system that China supposedly threatens. So that's Pax Americana, like Pax Romana under the Roman Empire, right? And this is a list of foreign policy motivations here. So what else is in that file that I might want to show you here? Well, I mean, this summarizes a lot of the points that I've been making in the class, right? So this is one of my articles I got published that explains, that pretty much articulates what I'm been using here in our class, in this American foreign policy class. And so I guess I can post that. You can all look at it. It's, you know, I'll put it on the website if you're interested. Okay, so we should make sure we do the attendance so I don't forget to do the attendance. So let's go to attendance, week 7, smart attendance, and your number is 275. 275 is your number. So let me go to the chat box and put in 275, and that is done. Okay, and now, was the Soviet Union a Russian version of Nazi Germany? Was the Soviet Union belligerent and nasty in its rhetoric and building up its big military because it wanted to try to conquer the world the way Hitler's Germany tried to conquer the world? Or was it belligerent and building up a big military because it was afraid? Because it thought that the United States and Great Britain and world capitalism would threatened it, wanted to destroy the Soviet Union. And so they were, because what's the best defense? A good offense. And this is a question that not many people ask, I think, at least in the American media. I ask it, but most people don't. And you know, my justification for arguing that the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States is fundamentally misunderstood, I think is a really critical question, critical issue, because it is on the basis of the argument that America saved you Koreans and you Belgians and you Kyrgyz from communist Soviet domination, is the justification for America's leadership in the war on terror and America's enemies being the world's enemies. That's the American argument. And so, but then of course, how it is that this evil empire, the Soviet Union, could just go poof. I mean, 30 years ago, at the end of 1991, the Soviet Union disappeared. How did that happen? If the Soviet Union was such an evil empire, how did it produce someone like Mikhail Gorbachev, who's 90 years old now? as the leader of the Soviet Union, and he implemented a détente strategy to lessen tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union, how did that evil empire produce somebody like Mikhail Gorbachev to become leader of the Soviet Union? If it was such an evil empire, like Mordor in Lord of the Rings. Was the Cold War based upon ultimately mutual misperception of threat? And that Mikhail Gorbachev and the Soviet Union, they weren't afraid of the Americans as the Americans were of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union believed that Europeans and the Germans were fundamentally different and they could work with the Europeans and so on. Is the European Union part of an explanation as to why Moscow under Gorbachev really believed that they did not have to worry about being attacked again by the West? Remember, they attacked twice. Russia was attacked twice in the 20th century. In World War I and World War II, occupied. 27 million Soviet citizens died in World War. 27, that's over half the population of Korea, South Korea. Gone. So you look around here at Korea, imagine everybody you see, half of them just disappear, like in that Marvel Comics film from a couple of years ago. Half the population is gone. All right, so, but if you're going to oppose, I mean, again, the point I'm trying to make is that those vested interests in that bureaucracy, they represent containment. They are the creation, that bureaucracy in America is the creation of containment. So let me go to an exercise here and go to vote. And let me open up an exercise statement here. Well, here, let me show you this. I showed you this once before, and make sure that you can see it, because otherwise I'll forget to share the screen. Right, during the Cold War, right, in the end of it in 1988, under the Reagan administration, in terms of seeing the most crystallized, clear version of a stereotypical diabolical enemy image that we talked about in class, you had the right-wing intelligentsia, including people like William F. Buckley in that firing line video in which he interviews Hans Morgenthau, right? He's here. That's William F. Buckley. The Soviet Union is Mordor, basically, with Sauron, the Communist Party, Leonid Brezhnev ruling over the evil empire. And then under Ronald Reagan, just a little bit more complex view of foreign policy making process in the Soviet Union. Defense Department, again, their motivation, their concern is to prepare for the worst scenarios. So they tend to see the worst threats because that's their job. They're supposed to prepare for the worst possible possibilities. And then the typical view, the dominant view that characterized overall the American foreign policy view of the Soviet Union was seeing some complexity. I mean, at this time, the Americans are selling lots of food to the Soviet Union. If you really believe the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany, then how can the Americans sell millions of tons of grain every year to the Soviet Union? If you really believe, despite Ronald Reagan's words and the words of commentary, how can you really believe the Soviet Union wants to conquer the world if you're willing also to sell it millions of tons of food to feed its soldiers? And that began under Nixon. The Americans began selling millions of tons of grain, corn and wheat to the Soviet Union so that the Soviet authorities could provide a better diet for their people, more meat. Even as the bureaucracy continues to talk in the early 1950s terms about the Soviet Union being an evil empire, the Soviet Union is dangerous, yet we're selling at the same time through the 1970s into the 1980s millions of tons of food a year to the Soviet Union. Because we got interest in those kinds of worldviews, right? Here you have the CIA and the State Department have a little more complex view, right? And then, of course, corporations, they see lots of business opportunities in the Soviet Union or in China today, 40 years later. And they want to exploit those business opportunities. So, of course, they're not going to say that the Soviet Union is not such a dangerous threat. It's not such an evil empire. We got money we want to make. People that don't pay attention much to politics, they have a more complex view of the Soviet Union. And then private, corporate, and foreign trade actors, they see, again, they want to do business with the Russians or with the Chinese today. And, you know, and that's built up. That's one big difference from the Soviet Union. There are lots of corporations that invested hundreds of billions of dollars in China since Deng Xiaoping became leader in late 1970s after Mao Zedong died, that they're going to continue to argue quietly but persistently that we have to keep doing business with China. China's not trying to conquer the world. China doesn't want to create a communist world empire. China's okay. They got their problems, but we can do business with them. And of course, you know, they have a vested interest in seeing the world that way. Then you have the non-defense bureaucracy, you know, the development organizations. Then you have the liberal intelligentsia here, that in terms of how they saw the Soviet Union. That, you know, a lot of them would say the Americans are more of a threat to the world peace than the Soviet Union. These people responding to the failure of the Vietnam War. If these people were right, then how could we lose the Vietnam War? Clearly, these people have a very simplistic understanding of the world because they were grossly wrong in explaining what was going on in Vietnam and Southeast Asia. And you can do the same thing for the Soviet Union at this time. Again, but the point is, in terms of the bureaucracy that we're highlighting here, is that the dominant view in the US today is that the Soviet Union was a Russian version of Nazi Germany. And these groups, the CIA and the Defense Department, but particularly this Defense Department, is the dominant bureaucracy, the dominant foreign policy bureaucracy. I mean, it's huge, right? I mean, now the US is spending almost $800 billion a year on defense, even though the Soviet Union's been gone for 30 years. But these people have a lot of supporters, a lot of defenders, and again, with the justification that these institutions, they saved the world from the Russian version of Nazi Germany. So they're good. They're not bad, they're good. And anybody that opposes them is bad. Who opposes America's friends are bad, like Iran is bad. North Korea is part of the axis of evil, like Iran. Saddam Hussein's Iraq is part of the axis of evil. You know, the evil empire and the Axis powers from World War II, put them together, you have the axis of evil. And okay, so you can do something similar for the Soviet Union. But what I'm emphasizing, these people are going to have a more complex view of the world than the Defense Department. And these people are seen as a threat from people like Donald Trump, because they're still seeing the Soviet Union, Ukraine as an ally against a resurgent Russia. And so do these people as well. Donald Trump, he doesn't care about any of this. He cares about making money and his own political career. I guess you put Donald Trump around here. Yeah, Russia's a problem. And again, I really appreciate these opportunities to teach you guys, because I'm learning some new things even as I speak here. Donald Trump represents these people, in a sense. He's not that attentive to politics. He doesn't care about the Cold War. He cares about making money. And he confronts these people who believe that Moscow and Russia is the descendant of the Soviet Union and wants to recreate the Soviet Union. But Donald Trump represents these people. And, you know, he doesn't care about Putin and his human rights abuses. He just cares about Donald Trump, right? And his political ambition, his demagogic political ambition. And so these people come under attack. And these people also, because to the extent to which they're seen as a threat to the personal and individual interests of Donald Trump and his supporters. Okay. See, you see the little light bulb going off on top of my head here? Boom. Yeah. I'm gonna have to write this down after class. So you can do the same thing with the Soviet Union, of course. There were those groups in the Soviet Union that were enemies of Gorbachev, that saw the United States as an enemy, evil empire. Capitalism led by the United States as an evil empire. The KGB was a little more sophisticated. I might think maybe even a lot more sophisticated, because it was the KGB leader, Yuri Andropov, who was the main patron to this guy becoming leader of the Soviet Union. So Yuri Andropov, the former head of the KGB, becomes leader of the Soviet Union when Brezhnev dies. And this leader of the most evil organization in the evil empire, the secret police, the KGB, he finds Gorbachev and says, this guy is the guy that should ultimately become ruler of the Soviet Union because he is a smart, intelligent, wise man. We need him. Gorbachev comes to power because of Yuri Andropov, the last leader of the KGB, or not the last leader, but the leader of the KGB who becomes leader of the Soviet Union after Leonid Brezhnev dies in 1982. How can this be an evil empire? I mean, these are the points I've been trying to make in my work. The apparatchik, Gorbachev did not see such a terrible threat from an evil threat from the West, because these notes are from when I was in graduate school from my professor. And nationalists who hate communism in the Soviet Union, Russian nationalists, Lithuanian nationalists, Ukrainian nationalists who hate the communist regime and they're ruling over their country, they're going to see America as more complicated and wonderful, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So if I hate communism and the Communist Party, and I'm a Ukrainian nationalist, anybody who hates my enemy, I'm going to like. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I'm going to see them in complex terms. And my concern is, of course, that these vested interests here are seeing the world as lacking the ability to organize itself, that the world needs American leadership because the world is degenerate. Unless you take action against the axis of evil. Saddam Hussein's Iraq, got rid of him. Muammar Gaddafi's Libya, got rid of him. Now we have to get rid of Kim Jong-un in North Korea, and we have to get rid of the Islamic regime in Iran. And maybe also the People's Republic of China, Communist Party. And then we can provide genuine peace and prosperity to the world under American leadership, a world that cannot thrive unless America provides leadership. The world is degenerate. It can't get itself organized. Only the Americans can organize the world. America's money, America's power, America's cultural influence, it is necessary. Like, it's not just Republicans. Barack Obama talks in these terms, right? America is the one indispensable nation, President Obama said. America is the one indispensable nation in the world that can provide leadership to deal with these challenges and threats. This is before Trump became president. Only the Americans can do it. Because the rest of you are nothing, cannot organize yourself without the leader who helped save the world from the Russian version of Nazi Germany. Okay, Mike, what do I want to talk about? I want to talk about, make sure that you sign up for conference sessions to meet with me next week. And so as we go on here, I think I just going to go on, I'll talk about the other stuff if I have time later. Let's talk about the foreign policy bureaucracy. So my question to you is, please respond to the following, make sure I say share the screen. Please respond to the following statement. U.S. professional foreign service diplomats should have more influence over U.S. foreign policy than U.S. elected government officials and their political appointees in the U.S. government. So do you strongly agree, neutral cannot decide, disagree, or strongly disagree? So let me divide you into 3 different groups. And so join your group and come to a decision as to where your group fits on this scale. So again, go back to where does your group fit on this scale? In responding to this statement, U.S. professional foreign service diplomats should have more influence over U.S. foreign policy than U.S. elected government officials, people like Donald Trump and Joe Biden and Barack Obama, that these foreign service diplomats, these professional establishment, the blob, right? The blob, remember we talked about the blob, that these people should have more influence over U.S. foreign policy than people like Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo and Rex Tillerson. And so please join your groups. And let me go back to, so who's going to speak for the group? And I'll flip a coin. Heads is the first person, and it's heads. So Dohi will speak for room 1 first, Elisa will speak for room 2, and Gilles will speak for room 3. And I will write a question statement as well, a placement statement as well. So heads, I'm 1 through 2. It's tails. So heads, I'm 3, neutral, and it's tails. So heads, I'm disagree, and it's tails again. So I strongly disagree. I strongly disagree. So I'm going to write a strongly disagree statement. Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay, so who's going to speak first? So let's flip a coin. And heads is room 1. Is heads. So Idohi, where does your group fit on this scale?
Actually, we can decide at this topic. We have two opinion about this topic because we want to know more information about the diploma in this sentence. Like there's background that why they elected from the people.
Yeah.
But so we want to more information about the topic, so we cannot decide it. But in my opinion, I choose the number 3 because the diploma are so important in the American policy, and also the U.S. government official also have a huge impacted to the foreign service. So I think both of them so important.
Yeah, okay, I see your point. I mean, insofar as, for example, I said foreign service diplomats. That includes people in the State Department, but there are people who are left and right in these big foreign policy establishments, right? You have more conservative, more hardline, stereotyping, national security, military type people. You have other people that are more focused on human rights concerns. What do we mean when we say foreign policy establishment? And I can understand it, but my sense is, for example, I taught at the American University in Bulgaria for 15 years until 2009 before coming here. And that organization, like the American University in Afghanistan, was funded by the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. And USAID was created by President John F. Kennedy, to spread American humanitarian soft power through American humanitarian aid and assistance programs. But those USAID universities, like American University in Bulgaria or American University in Afghanistan, or there's American University in Central Asia in Bishkek, in Kyrgyzstan right now, those are all organized with the assumption that those areas have to should become pro-American through soft power, particularly against Russia, that Russia will try to retake or expand its influence into the former Soviet territories that it lost when it fell apart 30 years ago. So even USAID, which is about humanitarian aid and development and soft, even it's still focused on Moscow, also Beijing, but now Moscow, but originally 30 years ago or 25 years ago on Moscow, Russia. Okay, and but it was those foreign policy, national security, and foreign service diplomats like Maria Jovanovic, or there was another one. There was the person in the National Security Council who filed the complaint. He was a military officer of a Ukrainian Jewish background. He was an American. His father came to the United States with his 2 boys when they were children, and they're both colonels in the U.S. U.S. Army or U.S. military. Vindman. Let me see. He was the one that complained. He was at the phone call that Trump made to pressure Ukrainian President Zelensky to announce a fake investigation against Hunter Biden. This is the person. So he was a U.S. military Army officer who was serving in the National Security Council, in the United States National Security Council, who was there and heard what Trump was saying to Zelensky And he was the one that started the process of complaint that led to Trump's impeachment. And then Trump fired him. Trump wouldn't renew his promotion. And so he's now a college professor doing something. He retired after 21 years in the military. He's Ukrainian American. He's an American citizen in the US military. So again, these foreign policy, national security professionals, not elected people, professionals who make their whole careers in the bureaucracies are, trying to fortify Ukraine. And Trump doesn't care about the Cold War, right? Again, I keep coming back to this, that Trump is, is this, this non-attentive, doesn't care too much about anything, just wants to make money. He's fighting these people. And some of these people as well in the Republican Party. People like George W. Bush is here, George H.W. Bush, the Bush family. Trump beat in the primary to win the presidential nominee for Republican Party in 2016. Those people, the Bushes, the George W. Bush, whose war on terror and the axis of evil, he's fighting them. He's fighting all these people because, not because he's a great guy, but because he wants to be dictator ruler of the United States, and he likes making money. That's his world. Okay. Wow. Let me go back to the breakout room. So room 2 is heads, and it is heads. So Elisa, where did your group come down on this scale?
We more agreed with the statement because we thought that maybe diplomats had more like expertise and info about certain topics, and also that they would be more like objectively than the government because they want to win support, win votes for the future.
But can you understand what Trump is arguing? The Cold War has been over 30 years ago. The Soviet Union disappeared 30 years ago in 1991. Right? Vladimir Putin, who is he fighting? Islam, political Islam, terrorists supposedly in Chechnya. Why is he America's enemy? The Soviet Union's gone. The Cold War's over. We should be friends with Russia. We can make so much money in Russia. And Russia has a border with big China. And Russians are Caucasians. Russians are Europeans. China's still got a communist party that rules it. So there's a little bit of racism there that, Russians are, they're European, white Europeans. I mean, it just makes sense. Russia should be an ally of the West. Soviet Union is gone. The Soviet Union is directly threatened by political Islamists. There are tens of millions of Islamists who live in Russia. He would be a natural ally. Why are we pushing Russia to be an enemy and join with China, which is what is happening now? As the Americans put sanctions on Russia for its annexation of Crimea and Ukraine, we're pushing them to ally with China. Why? Russia has no love for communists. The Communist Party of Russia is weak. But no, you have these vast vested interests built up over the Cold War that are continuing to push America to be anti-Moscow, anti-Moscow, anti-Moscow. And anybody who's anti-Moscow is good for the United States, including this corrupt country called Ukraine. It's so corrupt. It's no less corrupt, even more corrupt than Russia. And it's not even really, I mean, Ukraine as a country never existed until Lenin and Stalin created it, the way they created all of the borders of the Soviet Union for most part, among Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, Belarus. These were all creations of Lenin and Stalin. So, but those foreign policy bureaucrats, they're They represent the containment era, vast national security establishment involving trillions of dollars since the late 1940s to the present, and the millions of people that built a career and built a worldview and influenced the world around them to conform with their self-serving motivated reasoning. Over many years, many decades, over 2 or 3 generations. Yeah, they lost in Vietnam, but they explain that away. They say, well, we lost in Vietnam because we didn't fight that war intelligently, or it was a mistake, or Vietnam had the help of Russia and China, and Vietnam is on the Asian mainland, and so we lost that, but then we won the Cold War anyway, and so we forget about that, and just say, well, we screwed that up, but the only battle that counts in the war, like a Cold War, a hot war, is the last battle, and we won. Ha ha! And then we go to Afghanistan, and that regime collapses as fast as the communist regimes collapsed in Eastern Europe. Once those people in Eastern Europe realized the Soviet Union was not going to fight for them anymore, they went poof. And once the Afghan people realized that the United States was not going to use force to keep the Afghan government in power, it went poof. But the Americans really probably don't care that much because that's a problem for China and Russia more than it is for America. Afghanistan's far away from America. I mean, China actually has a border with Afghanistan. Uyghur nationalists are flee China to go to Afghanistan to hide from being persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party. Okay. Okay, so and then the last group, and that is Gilles. Gilles, where does your group fit on this scale, Gilles?
Well, all 3 of us had different opinions. One of us agreed, one of us was neutral, and one of us disagreed. I personally disagreed because I thought a foreign diplomat had to listen to the orders the central government had gave him, and the policy that the government tells him to follow is what he should transmit to the country where he is residing in. He can give input on how it should be done, but besides that, I don't think he should. They originally already have.
Yeah, I mean, you can make the argument, that Donald Trump was able to get the Americans out of Afghanistan. It was Donald Trump that negotiated with the Taliban for the Americans to leave. In return for the Taliban not attacking American soldiers, America started withdrawing its troops under Trump. And then he made it a commitment to get all Americans out by May 1 of this year, 2021. Of course, then Trump lost the election. Joe Biden came in and used Donald Trump's agreement with the Taliban to continue to pull the Americans out. He didn't get out on May 1, he got out by the end of August. But it was Donald Trump opposing that big blob, right? The foreign policy establishment to get out, even though the military is saying, no, don't get out, we can stay, so what? We're not wasting money. It's eventually they'll give up because they can't keep fighting the Americans. And so we lose a soldier or 2 every month. But, nobody's forcing anybody to join the military, and it's good practice, and, it's good training and we'll just stay. And, that's what they say. That's what they're still saying right now in the Defense Department of the United States. And it was elected leadership under Trump and then Biden building upon what Trump decided to get the Americans out of Afghanistan. Not the bureaucrats, not the professionals, the elected political leaders. Now, of course, the professionals are going to say, well, you're going to see what's going to happen because the Islamic State will come back to Afghanistan, and they're arguing that Afghanistan will again become a base for terrorism in the world, and we may well have to end up going back, supposedly. That this was a disaster. That's what they're saying. But we'll see. So I wrote a statement. U.S. foreign policy diplomats should not be, because I flipped a coin, right? According to Admiral Lee, U.S. foreign policy diplomats should not be the leaders in making U.S. I gotta make sure you see that screen. In U.S. foreign policy diplomats should not be the leaders in making U.S. foreign policy, because these vast American foreign policy bureaucratic vested interests are going to get the U.S. into a new Cold War with China. They are assuming that challenges to American influence, wherever they come around the world, are basically evil, because these interests institutionally embody the self-serving worldview that the US saved the world from a Russian version of Nazi Germany. These people and interests got us involved in catastrophes in Southeast Asia and now also in Afghanistan. Now, again, they are saying that, but again, I heard this on Democracy Now! This morning, there are vast vested interests in economic interests in China, that those interests tend to be quiet, but they're very powerful, that lobby and pressure companies and the governments of the United States not to punish China too much, because they have big interests in China. And they include old companies and new companies like Apple and elsewhere. And so those interests are going to lobby against carrying out a new Cold War against China. But nationalism is a powerful force. And during times of nationalist crisis, you see that these kind of interest group type driven foreign policies can be overridden, overcome by nationalist mobilization. I mean, but I'm trying to imagine a scenario, a crisis where, you know, the United States would break its trade relations with China over some crisis. And it's hard to imagine that the Americans would do that because, I mean, it would cause a global depression. Worse than what happened 13 years ago in 2008. But, you know, you listen to this stuff in the news media every morning and they're talking about a new Cold War, Taiwan, conflict with Taiwan. So, and so I want to show you further what's going on in this article here. Yeah, they were just highlighting how the Trump administration, it was sort of, I mean, again, it wasn't like Nixon in 1971. There was no plan. Donald Trump wasn't like Nixon. He didn't have any kind of a plan. He didn't expect to win the election in 2016, and then he won. Oh my God. So they were completely unprepared for winning the election. They didn't have a transition plan. They never got the government fully staffed during the time when Trump was president because they didn't bother to plan for a win. Trump acted as if this was a big marketing campaign. And then he won. There wasn't a plan for dealing with Russia or dealing with China. It was all about Trump doing what was best for Trump. And that means making money and being popular and getting any kind of support to make money and be popular. So this article highlights how they were really corrupt. People were taking gifts from foreign leaders. I mean, there's policies you have in place that if the king of Saudi Arabia gives the president a gift or gives the diplomat a gift, it has to be reported. They can't keep the gift. The Trump administration was getting all sorts of gifts from the king of Saudi Arabia, the Saudi royal family, the sheikhs of the oil sheikdoms, and they weren't reporting it. They were just it was just a complete basket case, completely indifferent to any of these ethics rules about how to make sure that people aren't being bribed by gifts from foreign leaders and so on. And it goes on how this is all being revealed now that the Trump administration lost and left Washington. And now the professional foreign policy bureaucrats are talking about all of these things that the Trump people were given as gifts, and they didn't report them. They didn't do anything. So it goes on. 82 gifts from the Saudis, the nation's. I mean, there are rules and regulations in place. I won't go over them here, but the Trump administration, the Trump people didn't report that they got these gifts, or they didn't do it the right way, or they They got things, I mean, it just goes on. I mean, just completely disorganized. Very, very different from Nixon. I mean, whatever you might want to say about Nixon, Nixon was into organization. Richard Nixon. Trump was this reality show host. It goes on here. Once the Biden administration took over, career officials, establishment officials began to examine the counting of foreign gifts without Trump officials looking over their shoulders. They found all of these gifts that the Trump administration was not reporting that they were getting from the Qataris, the Saudis. So you got, if you want to take on the foreign policy establishment, you've got to have a plan. You got to have a plan, and and Nixon and Kissinger had a plan to not be humiliated in Afghanistan, in Vietnam. I mean, Nixon won re-election in a landslide in 1972, partly because he claimed he was showing success in getting America out of Vietnam without looking too bad. Okay, so let me give you some participation credit by going to the vote on when I can find the class. I guess I closed it. Let me. Okay, so go like this, and close that, and go here, and so let me ask you to vote on whether or not you think the U.S. professional foreign service diplomats should have more influence over U.S. foreign policy than U.S. elected government officials and their political appointees in the U.S. government. So you have about 15 seconds. Okay, so we'll stop there, and let me go on now to the notes. Let's talk a bit more directly about the notes. The foreign policy bureaucracy. Hooray! Okay. Yeah, so make sure I'm sharing the screen. And I think is that it? Let me find the right screen. I think that's it. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, the US, the White House and Congress formulate foreign policy. And so they create these vast bureaucracies to implement containment from the late 1940s. But then those vast interests, those vast bureaucracies, they become political lobbyists. They become political interests. They have their own vested interests, right? So we have this belief that, you know, bureaucrats just do what they're told. Yeah, they do what they're told, but they also are participants in the foreign policy making process. And they have big influence because they involve so many people now in 2021. So, and you know, when the United States can't believe that, oh my God, Joseph Stalin wants to do what Adolf Hitler tried to do. And now Joseph Stalin is much more powerful than Adolf Hitler was. Soviet Union won World War II. The Soviet Union is already occupying half of Europe. The Soviet Union is helping the communists win in China. The Soviet Union is putting a communist regime in North Korea. Oh my God. And now, oh, in 1949, the Soviet Union tests its nuclear weapons, its first nuclear weapon. So we've got Adolf Hitler, a Russian version of Nazi Germany with nuclear weapons. Oh my God. And so you saw, since World War II, the institutions for formulating and implementing US foreign policy have become increasingly centered in the White House, and particularly in the State Department. I mean, sorry, in the Defense Department. And this all moves to the National Security Council. The National Security Council was created in 1947 and as part of this emerging Cold War, that the president has to take leadership and be able to act quickly wherever the evil empire through its devious, nefarious plans and conspiracies and aggression, attempts through its spies and agents and covert operations, not to mention, invasions if necessary, like in Afghanistan, supposedly in 1979, that the Americans can implement containment. And so we see with the National Security Council being established that the secretaries of state and defense play more distant roles. I think we covered some of this already in previous classes, in the previous class, but and this National Security Council body was set up in 1947, and it's a model that other countries have adopted. So there's a National Security Council in South Korea, there's a National Security Council in Japan, there's a National Security Council in China. It's a model that other countries have adopted. And if you look in Wikipedia, I think maybe I'll go ahead and show you that on Wikipedia. If you type in, I thought I had it here, National Security Council, you can see different models that draw from the US experience. It's like an American invention that other countries have adopted. So you can see it here, National Security Council. So Algeria, Armenia, Australia, Bangladesh, these all emerged after the Americans created their United States National Security Council. And the United States National Security Council, since its inception, 1947, under Harry S. Truman, it was the same act that created the National Security Council, that created the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the modern Department of Defense. Again, within the context of the Cold War, that, my God, the Soviet Union is a Russian version of Nazi Germany, and we got big problems. And so you can see who belongs to it. And go back here. I mean, China, it adopted one, I think just a few years ago. Japan also, just a few years ago. Korea, National Security Office here. So this is an American creation that other countries have copied because obviously they think it's useful. And these agencies often represent strong and frequently independent power centers. So just because you're president of the United States doesn't mean you're God. Doesn't mean you're Sauron in Mordor. You still have to play politics with these organizations because they will fight you and resist you, as you saw with Trump. Particularly if they think they have the Congress backing them up. So you can't fight them directly. You saw how Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, they secretly flew and organized their first meetings with the Chinese government to get around the foreign policy bureaucracy that was opposed to working with China. Keep in mind that I mean, I think I also want to highlight how Trump's history is one which reflects this Cold War experience insofar as, for example, McCarthyism. Let me show this this screen here. Many people have been, particularly Cold Warrior type people, have been suspicious of the State Department, because the State Department emphasizes people that have political knowledge and familiarity with the sophisticated complexity of all the other countries of the world. So if you work in the State Department and your responsibilities for China, you're supposed to know something about the complexities of Chinese society and policymaking. So you are more predisposed to see the world in a more complex way. And if you, on the other hand, are a hardline national Cold Warrior or world empire builder, you're likely to be suspect or suspicious of the State Department, because the State Department is often criticized for having too many people that are too close to the countries that they're responsible for analyzing and negotiating with. That people that that are in the Chinese section of the US State Department, they're too friendly to China because they like China. And they become suspect. And that was always the case, for example, back in the beginning of the Cold War, when Senator Joseph McCarthy was demanding to know or claiming that inside the US government were lots of secret communists working for Moscow, that there were lots of members of the American Communist Party working for Moscow. That explains why China became communist. That China, despite America's aid and assistance to China during the Second World War, that China fell to the Communist Party of China because of traitors and spies in America. So this person, Joe McCarthy, rose by claiming that there was treason and communists subverting the United States, particularly represented in the US State Department, right? That he claimed that, what did it say here? That in a speech in 1950, McCarthy presented a list of alleged members of the Communist Party of the USA working in the State Department, which attracted substantial press attention, and the term McCarthyism was published for the first time in March of that year. And of course, in June 1950, the Korean War would start. And so who lost China? Who lost China? And so the State Department, the US State Department, was purged of all of these people that were seen to be as too friendly to China, too empathetic with China, too soft on China. And so the State Department became an obstacle to opening up relations again with China after this experience of Joe McCarthy and McCarthyism, claiming that there were all of these communists in the US State Department. And one of Joe McCarthy's main advisors looking for these communists supposedly in the US government was a man named Roy Cohn. And let me see if I can, should come up here. Roy Cohn was McCarthy's lawyer investigator looking for the communists that supposedly were undermining US policy in Asia and elsewhere. And let me see if I can find it here. There you see. Let me see. Roy Cohn was an advisor to Joe McCarthy. This person became notorious, and he became Donald Trump's lawyer. After McCarthy was removed, he went back to New York City and he became Donald Trump's lawyer. And Donald Trump learned a lot from these demagogues like Cohn and McCarthy. And so there's a connection between this Cold War hysteria and demagogy for self-political advancement that goes back to Joe McCarthy that Donald Trump exploited. So you can see he represented and mentored the real estate developer and later US President Donald Trump during his early business career. Okay, so yeah, so that highlights this this bureaucracy becoming an obstacle to radical change, far-reaching change in American policy. And so if I go back then to the US foreign policy bureaucracy and open up that screen again, screen share. So yeah, so they can destroy you, as Donald Trump found out. 3 factors make bureaucratic managers at the US federal level especially powerful. Congress tends to be deferential to these bureaucracies, less so under Donald Trump. So for example, the military officials, the top senior military officials who oversaw America's departure from from Afghanistan, they were attacked by Trumpist supporters in the US Congress, being demanded they resign, talking in ways which, you know, we hadn't seen before, but again, represents this elected populist figure, Donald Trump. Even though Trump's not president anymore, as I said, he's still the dominant actor in the Republican Party, and appears he's going to run for president again in 2 years, 3 years. And his supporters in Congress are not showing this deference, this, you know, this deferral to the US military. White House constraints, bureaucracies have a significant degree of individual autonomy. In theory, the president can direct them, but they are too large and diverse to micromanage. I mean, when you appoint somebody to head that bureaucracy, you appoint them because they are going to have a lot of responsibility for making their own decisions. These bureaucracies have de facto permanent features with their interests, preferences, and standard operating procedures, as well as political allies, which a US president must accommodate. Well, and if you don't, you end up like Trump. You get impeached. Organizational expertise. Bureaucrats are specialists in their functional areas. They know more than the elected officials who create and direct the agency. But, you know, again, when the US client regime in Afghanistan just disappears, if you're someone who claims to be a bureaucratic expert in military security and so on, you don't look very competent in that case. Elected officials typically interfere little in the day-to-day functioning of the agency. They typically do so only when a policy failure occurs, like the collapse of the US client in Afghanistan. The foreign policy bureaucracy has not changed significantly since the passage of the 1947 National Security Act that created the National Security Council. It created the National Security Council, the Department of Defense, and the CIA. The foreign policy bureaucracy demonstrates path dependency. That is the pattern by which past decisions create vested interests and views that push future choices in particular directions. Yeah, so that's the term you often see in today's language regarding the influence of these vested interests. They create foreign policy path dependency, that they build up all these vast bureaucratic interests who have vested their organizational and individual career interests into a policy, and they're going to defend that policy and argue that policy is still useful and portray a world in a way that continues to defend and reproduce the policy until, oh my God, look what happened in Afghanistan. What happened? So, for example, the fact that the Department of Defense is so vast in comparison with the State Department is an indicator that the foreign policy makers are more likely to make foreign policy decisions that emphasize military rather than diplomatic solutions. That's an important point. I mean, U.S. Defense Department budget is now approaching $800 billion. The budget for the State Department is about $35 billion. That's it. And again, this is a legacy of the Cold War, that the Soviet Union understands force. That's what it understands. That's what it respects, because the Soviet Union is a Russian version of Nazi Germany. They don't care about human rights. They don't value life. They don't give, they value and respect force, the evil empire. And, you know, if most of the tools, bureaucratic tools in your toolbox that you have are different types of hammers, you know, like for nails, then your problems are more likely to look like nails, variations on nails, because that's what your tools are. So, you know, we would, the term you hear a lot in the bureaucracy today is kinetic solutions to foreign policy problems. Military, blow them up. Kinetic, you know, force. Are you going to come up with a kinetic solution to Islamic militancy? Again, I think, and that's a legacy of the Cold War. Foreign policy strategies become less political and more force-oriented because we think that the evil empire is this highly rational, monolithic, cynical, evil actor that only understands and respects the willingness and to use and apply force. And so you see that even today. I mean, again, this morning, again, the US Defense Department, other people are talking about possibility of war with China over Taiwan. Because it's an evil, China's another evil type empire. They don't care about life. How many people did Mao Zedong kill or help die, help kill in China? These people don't. Look what they're doing to the Uyghurs. They're trying to erase them, putting them in concentration camps, supposedly by the million or more, where their people are being raped. These people are they're communists. They don't care about life. They respect and understand force and their understanding of your ability to be willing to use it. And they don't think they think we Americans, like the Japanese, the way the Americans view the Japanese, that the Americans don't want to fight over Taiwan. American boys are going to come back dead over Taiwan in body bags, and military soldiers are going to come back and dead for Taiwan. Oh. I mean, I just heard this morning, this kind of language. And I think it's a legacy of the Cold War, in the belief that we won it. In Washington, advocates for promotion of global environmental protection are more likely to face more political difficulties because there's not a large federal agency responsible for the global environment. So there is some effort to get the national security groups in the United States, and the national security establishment and organizations, including the military, to focus on environmental issues as a national security threat. Right? So if you can phrase it in national security terms and somehow involve the military and the research groups and others that are involved in the military in dealing with that problem, that somehow you're going to be more effective in addressing the problem. So what are the good sides about bureaucracies? Bureaucracies provide stability to the government through their size, institutional memory, path dependency, right? I mean, they are the institutional memory. They're the ones that stood up to Trump in Ukraine by saying, hey, the US Congress passed and approved laws to aid Ukraine. Donald Trump cannot just get on the telephone and say, I'm going to keep that aid that the government agreed to give to you until you come up with some lie about Hunter Biden, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. Do you hear me? You can't do that. Nevertheless, organizations often fall short of their current effectiveness, of their coherent effectiveness in formulating and pursuing those foreign policy goals that were the intent of the creators of these organizations. So these bureaucracies compete with each other for influence in the military, intelligence, diplomatic fields. And so, they're more likely not to admit that they're wrong. So in Vietnam and Afghanistan, the US military was stating over the years, we're winning, and they weren't winning, because if you admit that you're failing, your budget's going to be cut. Consequently, different bureaucracies have goals in the outside world which can clash with each other, while they also have overlapping responsibilities. You see that sometimes in the CIA working with certain groups against other groups. It seems that the Americans, the CIA and the Defense Department are willing to or at least talking about cooperating with the Taliban in Afghanistan because of another supposed threat that they both share in the Islamic State. Keep in mind, you get to be, if you're an ambitious political figure, you got dreams, you love power, you want to rise, you want to be known in the history books as a great Secretary of Defense, you have got to defend your organization. You have to promote your organization. If you don't defend and promote the interests of your organization as the leader of the Defense Department or the State Department or the CIA, you're going to go down as a failure. So these top officials who are intensely ambitious figures, they often struggle with each other and they intensely dislike each other. The rivalry and dislike between the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, when U.S. invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, and U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell in the State Department was legendary. And they fought primarily for the attention of the U.S. president, and Rumsfeld ended up winning the president's favor. And eventually, Colin Powell resigned. So these organizations fight and clash with each other. And if you're the president, your job is to think about it. You're just a human being. You're the president of the United States. You want everybody to continue to cooperate with each other. So typically what you do is you try to come up with compromises between your Secretary of State, your Secretary of Defense, your other officials and leaders, because you got many, many problems you have to deal with every day. And after you solve this problem or come to a decision on this problem, you have the next crisis, and you have the next crisis, and the next crisis. And your task as the president of the United States is to keep your government coherent and looking like it's coherent and effective, because you're always worried about the next elections. And if you look like your government is dysfunctional, disorganized, you are going to be in a disadvantage. And that happened to Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump tried to compensate by mobilizing his enthusiastic base, but his enthusiastic base is no more than, say, 43 or 44% of the American voters. The other 64% hate Trump. Or sorry, 56% hate Trump. So Joe Biden is always going to be focusing on trying to look like the government is effective, even if it means coming up with compromises that avoid glaring failures. And that's what he's arguing with regarding Afghanistan. The Trump administration made a deal with the Taliban for the Taliban not to attack US soldiers in Afghanistan. And they haven't attacked US soldiers for a year and a half because of that deal. And he's blaming Trump, in other words, for the American disaster, the failure, the collapse of the Kabul government. But he's still being blamed for it by his adversaries. So the Congressional Research Service highlighted the following issues regarding today's foreign policy bureaucracy. The Pentagon, the Defense Department, dominates American foreign policy, not the State Department. Civilian agencies tend to lack resources, not the Defense Department. Central leadership is weak. So these bureaucracies tend to work on their own established standard operating procedures. Planning is poor. Again, if you're Joe Biden, you are wanting to basically just keep your top officials in your government cooperating with each other, even if it means coming up with decisions that don't really solve problems. Agencies inadequately report to each other what they are doing because agencies, they want to protect their own interests and they don't want to reveal to other organizations what they're doing because the other organizations might say that they can do it better. Coordination and budget making is lacking, and congressional oversight has a weak structure. So again, this goes back to what we were highlighting earlier, that this is complex foreign policy decision making. So we understand that the United States president is limited and constrained. The same is true in Iran, although there might be more of a reliance upon using coercion against political adversaries of the rulers in Iran. This characterizes Iran. This characterizes China. This characterizes any country. But if you see a diabolical enemy, no, there's Sauron, Stalin in Baradur or the Kremlin, orchestrating his worldwide conspiracy to take over the world. This is politics. This is the reality of the foreign policy decision-making process. It's sloppy, messy, and it's very difficult to oversee and coordinate it. And policies tend to be run on bureaucratic inertia, with being on autopilot until something blows up and there's a crisis that forces everybody to change their orientation because they're humiliated or deeply threatened, or both, due to a national crisis. And so what else do I want to highlight here? Yeah, the State Department is the oldest body, but it's no longer the most important body in making foreign policy. And of course, we're all about democracy in the United States, right? So private citizens are supposed to have input in the foreign policy making process. The Defense Department is supposed to represent the US government. It's supposed to represent the United States government and international organizations like the United Nations. It's supposed to protect the interests of private citizens. And it's supposed to facilitate communication between foreign governments in the United States. But at the same time, US presidents can get on the phone and call up another country. They don't have to go through the State Department. I mean, the State Department was created, in 1781, before there was radio and television and telephones. So your ambassadors were really important figures at that time, because they had to have a lot of independence and autonomy to act, because it took 3 months to communicate across the Atlantic Ocean on a boat. And so the U.S. Defense provides services to foreign Americans abroad and so on. The U.S. Secretary of State is fourth in line to the presidency. The Secretary of State has become less and less important in making foreign policy since the Cold War.
Who is the third in line?
The current Secretary of State is Anthony Blinken.
But you said it's fourth in line, right? Secretary of State?
Yeah, but
who is third?
Third, I think,
position?
is Speaker of the House.
Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, that's if there's like a nuclear attack on Washington. I mean, and everybody, people, the president, vice president, and the speaker get killed if the Secretary of State. But it's not really. It's just a legacy of it's an interesting historical fact. So the State Department, and this is before, I mean, Rex Tillerson, when he came in, he was brought in, as a businessman. He was a ExxonMobil chief executive officer. His whole career, his entire adult life was on Exxon. And he came in and he was going to be Secretary of State, and he was going to make the State Department run more rationally. And, and business people, particularly in the oil business, they're all about, quantitative measures, and he tried to radically change the functioning of the State Department, and he pretty much failed. But he got fired because even he became really upset with how Donald Trump's mind appeared to function. So it's a pretty small organization. It's got 76,000 people that work for it. And 14,000 of those people are foreign service officers, including ambassadors and so on. But they're not really that important in making U.S. foreign policy. Joe Biden might say he wants them to be more important, but again, you still have these vast vested interests that built up in containing the evil empire. that supposedly only understood the willingness and ability to use force. And so you see more other organizations become more and more important in making U.S. foreign policy since the Cold War, with trade and commerce becoming more important. This person, as the trade representative, has become more prominent in making U.S. and representing U.S. foreign policy, and joining whether or not the Trans-Pacific Partnership or the any kind of free trade agreement becomes a major security statement, right? The U.S. South Korea FTA or European Union South Korea Free Trade Agreement. It's not just about trade and business. It's about a strategic relationship. It's not just about business, and we all know this. And then, of course, we also see the rise of big global corporations and their leaders becoming important, like Bill Gates. He's been very active in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic in his efforts. Yeah, I mean, in 2018, the U.S. State Department budget was $37 billion. That's less than 6% of the U.S. national defense budget. And it is far less than the money that the U.S. spends on intelligence and homeland security. And again, its State Department has always been suspect by those people that see intense stereotypes, because these people, they are have more incentive to see the world in complex terms, to not stereotype, to see evil empires or degenerates, or what, to see complexity in how China makes its foreign policy, for example. And so they get criticized for being elitist, that they are, and that they also tend not to reflect the diversity of America, right? They tend to be men with Ivy League degrees from Yale and Harvard and so on. That they're excessively cautious, and that the term is that they become so infatuated with the countries that they represent that they become more loyal or towards representing those countries than in representing the interests of the United States in the American foreign policy, international relations. And that was the particular claim of those people that supported Trump. That, America first, not globalizing America, not in favor of the global interests. No, globalizer's bad. America first, make America great again. And so we're coming to the end of our class today. And does anybody have any questions? If not, thank you very much again for giving me an opportunity to really develop some important ideas. And I will acknowledge you, my students, for allowing me to have the opportunity to develop these ideas. So thank you. Bye.